Welcome back in the Doomsday School of Space Physics. This episode will be different. You can say that we've just graduated from the space weather and began a new chapter of education. Of course, everything what I've said until now doesn't change a bit, and I will use often the knowledge which I've assimilated during last couple years. I wanted to make a small introduction to this subject in my previous movie, but I've managed only to show you a simulation which I want to talk about later in this lesson. But before I will proceed, I want to tell you something about my nameless personality. You need to know that during all the years of my education, physics was my worst enemy. I supposed to be a teacher of art. In the education, this is as far from physics as you can get. All the people around me expected that I will be some famous artist, but deep in my heart I knew that this is not what I want to achieve in my life. Problem is that I always wanted to change the world. Artists, even the most famous ones, didn't make anything what would shape the history of our civilization. Art might be cool, but what does it change in the everyday life? Not much. My life changed during summer 2012. You can treat this as a warning. This is what can happen to you if you think too much. Although I barely passed physics during high school, I was always interested in the world which surrounds us. Today I know that I simply can't learn about things which I don't understand. Mathematical formulas and complex calculations don't have any meaning for me if I can't visualize it. I wasn't so bad in mathematics. In the difference to physics, most of those numbers are completely virtual. Math allows you to calculate things. Physics, however, is supposed to scientifically explain the reality which can be seen, touched and measured. Or maybe it doesn't. Energy equals mass multiplied by speed of light squared. But what does it mean? What energy? Why squared? Of course, big part of physics explain forces which affect solid objects and shape the reality in which we exist. But the deeper we go into this subject, the further away we move from the material existence. Part of electromagnetism is still enough visual for most of people to understand. But somewhere on the way, physics becomes esoteric. In the end, we enter the part of reality which exists somewhere next to us, but beyond our perception. This is where existence becomes virtual, and this is where many can get lost. To make it all even worse, in this point we start to learn about Einstein's theory of general relativity. And this is where physics becomes theory, only partially confirmed by observation. Einstein made a lot of calculations about things which can't be physically measured, and turned a philosophy into streams of virtual numbers. Of course, big part of his theory was already confirmed as correct, but in its base, general relativity is completely metaphysical. And just when you might start to think that it can't get any worse, we start to learn the basics of quantum mechanics. In this moment, physics start to deal with things which are such exotic and virtual that most of scientists think about quantum physicists as about some kind of wizards who practice magic of chaos and mess with a mystic realm which is beyond the understanding for a rational and scientific mind. In the very beginning of Introduction to the Physics of Particles, we learn that all the laws and formulas which we've heard so far don't apply to the smallest bits of physical matter. The realm of microscale seems to work in a totally different way than the physical reality in which we exist. Matter in its most primitive form doesn't act like matter. Solid objects and the atoms which create it seems to exist in completely different realities, even if they both occupy the same physical and dimensional space. Until today, there is still no agreement between classical and quantum physicists. This disagreement went so far in one point that Einstein simply rejected discoveries in the field of quantum physics. Results of scientifically valid experiments didn't fit to the theory of general relativity. In order to defend his famous theory, Einstein had to reject facts confirmed by observation. In response to the basic laws of quantum mechanics, he said, "God is not playing at dice." Although he made couple attempts to unify the science and worked with many famous quantum physicists, physics is divided till this day. Standard model is still incomplete. But what the problem is all about? Why physics can't connect those two states of existence into a single and solid object made of physical particles with physical properties. It's all about the natural state of particles in the quantum realm. In fact, it's hard to talk about any particles at all. Observations prove that the building brick of physical matter don't exist physically. Atoms exist only because of the possibility of their existence. Where the possibility of existence is high, there an atom appears. Looks pretty simple, right? This state of existence is known as superposition, and it is in fact rather simple to understand. When we hear a word electron, we imagine a tiny spark with an electric charge which orbit around the core in atom. Well, this is wrong. In fact, electron is a cloud of its possible existence. Electron is the cloud, and is placed in every location within this cloud. Electron is not a particle in its natural form. But now listen to the true miracle of quantum physics. Electron can become a single and physical particle, but it can't do it by himself. It has to be measured by someone conscious. And this is when physics turns into parapsychology. Remember that philosophy is the mother or father of the entire science. Mathematics is a child of logic. You can calculate almost everything using digits. But if it lacks common sense, it is useless. In modern times, existence grew to 11 alternative and physical dimensions, which are floating parallel to our solid and material world. People, wake up! Standard Model is a freaking science fiction fairy tale. Did anyone travel 60 years back in time and killed his own grandfather to see if it will create a new alternative dimensions placed diagonally upwards to the other ones? Are there any at all, evidences of dimensional time? Greatest scientists, like Stephen Hawking or Morgan Freeman, will show you nicely where the science has arrived. According to the speaker voice of the greatest mind of our time, the fact that we exist, despite the entire chaos, is a pure coincidence. Listen, Mr. Hawkins, there is no such thing as coincidence. There is logic in all the laws and forces in known universe. If you can't fit two pieces of a puzzle together, you probably play with shitty toys. Now you will hear the truth in its purest form. Ultimate and simple fact, which is so plain and bright that any attempt denying it are just insults to your own intelligence. Whole existence is based on this most obvious of statements. Ask this question to yourself. What actually exists? There is only one correct answer, and it is known to humanity for more than 2000 years. However, today scientists are mostly afraid to look in this direction. Maybe this will tell you something. Cogito ergo sum. This is the only truth. Prepare. I am. The end. Yes, really, that's it. I exist, and it's a fact. Beyond this point, we can only assume that everything except me is real. But what if I live in my own dream, or in a virtual reality? What if only my dreams are real? Are you sure that you want to hear the answers? Because if you will continue to follow my explanations, it might leave some permanent changes in your perception of everything. Are you ready? I warned you. I am capable to define myself. I am someone, a person. I am who I am. Ring a bell? Yahweh in Hebrew. This is the only objective truth, and I can bet that many of you simply won't be able to assimilate it during the first contact. Are you ready to meet a God who can be understood by anyone? But let's now move back to the world of science to face the biggest mystery of quantum physics. Why something as undetermined as an atom appears as solid and determined matter? I asked this question to myself 5 years ago, and I've learned the answer. It changed my life forever. Two simple words whispered into the ear of my mind. For you. I exist, and everything exists for me. It might exist as well for all of you, but everything what exists for you is not the same as everything what exists for me. You and me can agree or disagree in our opinions about all the aspects of existence. Superposition of subatomic particles allow both opinions being correct, or none of them. By comparing our thoughts, societies create statements which are accepted as valid by the majority. But there will be always some disagreements between the units. For all of those who like to decide about different opinions, how do you think? Are ghosts and demons real? Before you give the answer, ask yourself what a bat can know about the color of sunlight. For a bat, the light doesn't exist at all. Can you assume that your perception of existence is true? Can you see radio waves? They are all around you, all the time. What if someone can see them? I think that it might be possible. Why not? Being aware of own existence is everything about what we can be sure. Every other statement is subjective. Keep all of this in mind next time when you will speak about so-called reality, because actually only your mind is real. And this is how I've just started the destruction of standard model. By defining the most basic facts, I've just created a fundament on which I will build a model which will be based on observations and not science fiction movies from 1990s. Time to end with the theories. There is just one more step to make in order to raise the pillars on which I will construct the most obvious model of universe. I feel almost sorry that the claims which I'm about to make lead directly to the funeral of standard model. Well, I just hope that the world of science will face its grim destiny with dignity. All I need to do is to describe the most basic aspects of the environment in which my mind exists in its conscious state. And it couldn't be more simple. Here we go. I exist here and now. I would love to find someone who would try to disagree with this statement. Here is the location of my existence. Specific area in dimensional and measurable space. Now is a moment in which future becomes the present and turns into past. Existence becomes constantly real in a single point of time, which is, by coincidence, known as real time. This current moment is such brief that it can't be measured, but for the mind it exists all the time as a point. Do I exist somewhere else than in my current location? Do I exist in my own future or in the past? What? Are you stupid? I am right where I am in this moment, sitting in front of my PC. According to Einstein theory, I exist as well, stretched along the axis of dimensional time. But as I said earlier, my model is supposed to be based only on scientifically valid observation, and not some sick mathematical fiction. Okay, until this moment most of you assumed probably that I will speak here about some kind of weird philosophy. You are absolutely correct. General theory of everything will deal with many metaphysical aspects of existence. But it will explain as well entire physical mechanism of the universe. Until this moment I didn't make any assumptions. I gave the most obvious statements there are. To proceed further, I need however to assume something with what some of you might disagree. I have to dismiss the theory of flat Earth, which is of course the most utter and obvious bullshit there is. I need as well to accept as valid everything what astronomy tells us about the motion of celestial bodies in space. Is it an assumption at all? But I have to begin by explaining you the most primitive aspects of physical existence. Ask a student of primary school how many physical dimensions of space can be measured. Most will tell you that there are 3 of them. Some of the smartest kids will tell you that time is the 4th dimension. Ask the same question to a space physicist and he will tell you about another 7 additional dimensions which exist physically somewhere beyond our perception and can't be measured with our current technology. Yeah, and they say that kids live in their imaginations. It seems that the world of science needs couple humiliating slaps in the face to wake up from the slumber and stop mumbling not the nonsense about some stupid dreams. If you are not sure how many dimensions has the physical space, go back to primary school and ask some of the children who are brighter than you. There are 3 directions of space which allow us to point out the exact location of everything what exists physically within this space. X, Y, Z. By combining them, we get the 3D environment, the only environment which we can perceive as physical. Hopefully you've learned that it will be better for you if you remain silent. Because I can't perceive nothing what exists in the future or in the past, I don't have anything to support the claims of Albert Einstein, who assumed the physical existence of time beyond the present moment. Come back if you will find any evidence of possible time travel. Good luck. Okay, now it's the time for all the supporters of Standard Model to make your first attempt of defending your precious scientific point of view. Because I still keep some stupid faith in human intelligence, I assume that some of you will tell me that we can measure the time. Everything what is taking place in the dimensional space can be described by its time. You are absolutely correct. Things are taking place in time. Universe becomes constantly real, and it happens all the time since some hypothetical beginning of all creation. However, the time span of all other events is much shorter. Something can be taking place for many days. Some events can happen in the matter of couple hours or years. We absolutely need the time to describe physical existence with all its laws. I think that some part of scientists started just now to smile. You might think that there is still hope for you. Maybe I will allow you to keep some remains of the Standard Model in your pockets to bring you good luck. Sorry, but not this time. I really enjoy to humiliate a defenseless opponent. It gives me a lot of sadistic pleasure. Be sure that before I will finish this course, I will decompose carefully each single aspect of Standard Model. I will rip off all of its deformed limbs and hang them as trophies in front of those who deny the truth. There will be a lot of fun. Let me ask you another simple question. How do we measure the time? We use a physical phenomenon which is taking place in measurable cycles. One day equals to one rotation of a planet which circles around star every single year. This is the ultimate calendar of known universe. No matter on which planet you will live, those constant values could be used to measure the time. Frequency of a cycle is the only scientific way to describe time in physical terms. And there is almost an infinite number of different cycles which keep taking place all the time. Let me show you an example of a random cycle which is taking place in virtual 3D environment. This is a visualization of planetary cycle. Of course, I've made up all the values. Don't expect it to simulate the solar system. In this example, I've created a virtual cycle in which every planet rotates 8 times around its own axis. You can say that this model includes 8 virtual days on a virtual planet. This is all what this visualization shows at this stage. I didn't apply any physical forces, as I want to concentrate only on the cycles in space. Now I will include the orbital cycle of celestial bodies. During the time of 8 planetary days, smaller planet makes 4 full orbital cycles around the central body. You can say that this model includes 4 virtual years. During every orbital cycle, each body makes 2 full rotations. It means that each year on my virtual planet is 2 days long. As I said earlier, this model can be applied to every single planetary or star system. I can modify the frequency of those cycles and turn this into a visualization of Earth's and lunar cycles, or I can turn this into entire solar system. In the universe, small celestial bodies orbit around larger planets. Those planets move around objects which are even bigger. Those objects have as well their own orbital cycles. Moon moves around Earth, which rotates around the Sun, which is orbiting the center of galaxy. Of course, galaxies have as well their own cycles, but let's leave it for now. Let's now include the orbital cycle of this virtual central body. Let's say that it shows the Earth and the Moon which move together around the Sun, which is invisible in this moment. At this time, my model includes the daily cycles, lunar cycles and yearly cycles. I want you to forget about this object for now. Next step is to add the rotation of galaxy. Star in my virtual model rotates together with all the planets around a virtual galaxy center. Because my model is at this moment not big enough to visualize the galactic cycle, I will make the star to move along a straight line. This line shows the distance passed by the star during 4 planetary orbit cycles. Just a second ago, I went through the software crash and the scene which I was working with is gone. Luckily, I've managed to export the model of star system and I can use it in the new project. Good side is that now it works much faster than before. Now let's look at the same animation from a 2D point of view. As you can see, all the orbits are tilted to the direction in which the central body is moving. This is most likely how it looks in most of star systems. However, I'll make it easier and make the orbits perpendicular to the flow direction. And now the fun begins. Let's hide everything except the celestial bodies and look at their motion in space. Without visible orbits, we can see clearly that the objects don't move in circles anymore. But their motion can be still tracked easily. In order to show you the real motion of those objects, I would have to draw the actual path. Lucky enough, I won't have to draw it point after point, as the software which I use can create spiral as one of the default objects. It saved me a lot of work. It seems as well that it fits perfectly to the frequency of orbital cycles. Check it out. As I said before, in this example each planetary body makes 4 orbital cycles. I've marked in yellow the actual motion path for the Moon. As you can see, it is placed at an angle to the motion path of central planet. Here is the 3D view of the entire animation. From astronomical observations of lunar and planetary cycles in the solar system, we know already that the smaller is the size of an orbit, the bigger is the frequency of orbital cycles. Bodies which move along inner orbits in a planetary star system complete their cycles much faster than bodies placed further from the center. At least this is how the solar system looks like. For the objects located in the Oort cloud, it takes couple thousand years to complete a single orbit. For example, our Moon completes around 12 orbital cycles during a single year on Earth. This is why I will now increase the frequency of lunar cycle in my virtual model. Now it makes 4 cycles for each orbital cycle of the planet. This animation includes 4 planetary cycles, so during this time Moon makes 16 rotations. One more look on the 2-dimensional cut view. Of course, the smaller is the orbit, the shorter is the path which a body has to pass during a single cycle. However, it seems that the velocity of orbital motion gets higher the closer to the center the orbit is placed. For now, I've added to the model a second planet which is placed on a smaller orbit and has an orbital frequency which is 2 times higher than the outer body. During this animation, inner planet completes 8 orbital cycles. This is how look the true motion path of the virtual Moon in my model after I made his orbital frequency 4 times higher. And now I increase the frequency to 8 cycles in a single year of the bigger planet. I won't track the motion path of Moon this time, as it gets harder when the frequency grows, but I draw how it looks like more or less. As you probably can see, orbital cycle of the Moon creates another spiral which is wrapped around bigger one, created from the orbital cycle of outer planet. This is the only way to visualize the time. Cycles which are taking place within larger cycles. Frequency of cycles is growing the closer we get to the center of a planetary star system. And this is probably the right moment to start the introduction to the fourth dimension of measurable space. It's time to see my model from a different perspective. Until now, we've watched the motions of celestial bodies from above, but for someone who is located on the surface of a planet, everything looks differently. Size does matter in space. Your perception of environment has almost nothing in common with the world of insects. Beneath your feet exists a realm which you can't even imagine. Although you can peek into the microspace using a magnifier, you won't never be able to see the world from a perspective of a bag. By changing the scale, we change the physical properties of the environment in which mind exists. Difference of size shapes our perception of space. The bigger the difference is, the greater is the distortion of perception. Let's say that you are an ant, and you are looking at an elephant, which stands right in front of you. Can you imagine how gigantic would be the beast for you? Think what would happen if he would start to move his front leg and suddenly stomp on the ground a couple inches from you. Is it too much for your imagination? Don't worry, there is as well another way. Instead to be an ant, you can remain in your natural size, only change the elephant for Godzilla. It will work just as fine. If you know how to use your imagination properly, you should be able to notice that from your perspective, Godzilla is moving slowly. Of course, in fact it is moving much faster than you are, but to see the actual speed, you would have to come very close to the monster. The closer you get to the beast, the faster it seems to move. From the distance, Godzilla's legs seem to move in slow motion, but when you stand between its feet, you are able to see how fast the movement actually is. But this is just a theory. Question is if it can be proved with science. General theory of everything has to explain each single aspect of the universe, using scientifically valid facts. However, I can't change my own scale, so there is no chance to confirm any of those claims by observation. Luckily, there is much less limits in their digital reality. Although there is no way to scale the point of view, I can play freely with the size of environment. I can as well place the camera everywhere I want. That's all what I need to prove everything what I said before. Look how much your perception depends on the scale and your point of view. You can see here two cycles with the same frequencies. I didn't include any bodies in the upper cycle, but it would be a waste of time, as both cycles match perfectly in the timing. But now, let's put things into perspective. Look at the 2D cut and see how huge is the difference of scale between those cycles. This is the camera which I use as the point of view in the previous animation. It should be a nice point of reference. Okay, time to explain how it affects the apparent flow of time. Both cycles have exactly the same frequency, 8 cycles which take place during the same period of time. Both events seem to have the same apparent velocity of motion. Far in the distance, a giant mutated lizard makes 8 destructive steps towards a defenseless city. Right in front of you, there is a very Right in front of you, there is a very realistic model of Godzilla. Toy seems to work nicely, as during the same time it makes as well 8 mechanical steps. What makes the difference between those cycles is the distance which was passed after 8 steps of the Godzilla toy and the real monster far ahead. With which of its steps, giant monster is passing a distance which is many times bigger than the distance completed after all 8 cycles of the toy. Difference of scale is in such case equalized by the distance in physical space. But because the larger object has to pass greater distance in the same number of cycles as the smaller body, velocity of motion has to be much higher in the bigger cycle. Difference between both velocities should be visible better when we will place both cycles next to each other. I've decided to move the smaller cycle inside the bigger one, just like in the case of orbital cycles in planetary systems. But all what I said until now wasn't anything new for the science. The real bomb comes in this moment. As you can see, the larger body moves much faster than the smaller one, and this is not what I wanted to see. Couple minutes ago, I've told you that the bigger the cycle gets, the smaller is its apparent velocity for smaller cycles. But in this animation, large body moves much faster than the smaller one. So maybe I was wrong. I can bet that many of you would be delighted if my claims would turn out to be incorrect. Sadly, not this time. I have already most of the answers, so better prepare, as the rotten world of science will tremble in a second or two. You see, problem is that this software uses a completely virtual measurement of time. Length of animation is described by the number of frames, 600 in this case. In this virtual environment, it is the only objective way to measure the time. However, flow of time depends on the subjective perception of a mind. Sadly, this software doesn't include any kind of tool which will simulate the brain. Distortions of the frequency rate won't affect the length of animation. To observe time dilation, I need to measure the time. But what to do if there are no units of time in this environment? Didn't I tell you recently how to define the time in space? I will simply use the units which I defined somewhere in the beginning of my explanation. Let's say that those 4 cycles will become my unit of time. 4 months in 1 year. This is the way in which I will measure the time. Look out, as before I used the same length to describe the distance in physical space. This is something different. In the difference to the Godzilla example, this measurement can't be used as objective value, as it depends on variable numbers. Time is not a dimension, but the rate of everything what takes place in the environment. And now, let's see what will happen with this rate if I compare it with the smaller cycle. And here it is, just as I predicted. During the time of 1 virtual year, smaller body makes 32 cycles, what causes a significant increase of its apparent velocity. Now you can start digging the grave for standard model, but I think that better to burn it alive. Of course, the distortion of time flow should work as well in the other way, and it does. In this example, time is defined by 8 orbital cycles of the smaller body. During this time, large object makes only 1 cycle. From the micro perspective, bigger planet is moving very slow. Let's compare now the velocities of bodies in all of the cycles. I've had to slightly modify the model. Now 8 orbital cycles define 1 year for all the bodies in every virtual system. Cycle in the bottom of this view shows the objective frequency of both cycles. Smaller cycle is a scaled model of the bigger one. In the middle is the frequency of cycles measured using the time on the big planet. Cycle on top is based on the frequency of smaller body. I think that this example proves nicely how much the apparent flow of time is affected by the difference of scale in physical space. And this is how I came to the first conclusion of general theory of everything. Infinite scale is the fourth and last of physical dimensions in space. 11-dimensional multiverse is just as scientific as flat Earth theory. I'm sure that some of you will tell right now that all those planetary cycles don't have any actual meaning on Earth, where we have the global time and atomic clocks. How our perception of time can be affected by some other cycles. This concept of time dilation is probably completely virtual, right? Well, not really. This model can be applied to every possible situation, which includes the apparent flow of time affected by scale. I base it on motions of celestial bodies in space, but I can use it as well to describe the environment of Earth. For example, let's imagine that we are suddenly shrink to the size of a cockroach. To make it more funny, let's assume that we have two clocks with us. One is digital and one is analog. Let's add as well someone who remained in his natural size and keeps watching us from above. The plan is to measure the flow of time from my own micro perspective and the perspective of someone with normal size. For now, let's assume that the cycle of bigger planet on the bottom represents the frequency of analog clocks in the macro environment. 8 hours, but it doesn't matter. I was shrinked together with both clocks. According to the analog one, the flow of time didn't change at all. The frequency of his mechanism was shrinked together with me. Okay, I admit that it was a stupid idea to tell you about the digital clock. In fact, I have no idea how scaling would affect the frequencies of a microchip. Let's say it simply exploded. Anyway, let's try to guess how the microscale affected your perception of environment. The rate of apparent time flow would be scaled together with me, so it will remain normal in my perspective. Only by comparing the measurements of apparent time, I would be able to guess that something's wrong with all the clocks on Earth, except my own watch, which seems to work nicely. I won't even talk about all the details which I would be able to see in the micro scale, but generally I would start to resonate with a completely new frequency band. On the other hand, from the macro perspective, my voice would become squeaky and my movements would appear to be faster. After a couple of weeks I would be probably dead. If I wouldn't be eaten by some killer insects from microscopic hell, I would probably die as an old man due to the increased rate of apparent time. And now probably most of you will try to grow bigger. Good luck. There is still one more aspect of physical space which I have to discuss in order to proceed further, deeper and closer in the creation of an unified model of universe. I've told you a couple minutes ago about the infinite scale. Is it really infinite? Or maybe there is some physical limit for zooming the dimensional space in and out? Let me answer this question with an example of a random cycle, which can be seen in microscale. Now let's zoom out. As you can see, from a distance, wave pattern turned into a solid line. Of course, the software which I'm using is not a simulator of universe, so the zoom factor reached right now its limit. But allow me to make the first assumption of my theory. Is it a theory at all? I can't find too many things which I still have to prove. In this case, I assume that in the scale dimension there is a point for each cycle when the frequency becomes so high that it turns into solid physical existence. Of course, it works as well in the other way. Zooming into solid matter will at some point turn it into a wave. Maybe some of you know already how I will use this assumption in next movies. I hope that you've liked my new form of education, because something tells me that this is what I want to do until I won't cover everything what the unified theory of universe will include. And believe me, there is still a lot to cover. Today I just touched it for the first time, and probably caused global disaster in the world of science. All I did for now was to describe the environment in which I will place together all the pieces of universe. At least the part which describes physics of plasma is almost completed. But there is still a long way ahead of me until I will reach space weather. But before I finish, I want to confirm everything what I said in this movie with couple visual evidences. As some of you probably noticed already, in my model there is not much to argue with. But if you still treat my explanations as some virtual and paraphysical mumbo-jumbo, then look at those examples of time dilation in the dimensional scale. I choose this example because I want to show you how blind the science can be when some of the observations don't fit to the scientific point of view. This is the Exoplanet Data Explorer site, and here you can see the table containing the data about all the planets beyond solar system which we discovered so far. I've sorted this list according to the orbital periods of those planets. This frequency is given in a unit which equals to 1 day on Earth. Take a look at those values. Don't you think that something has to be wrong with this data? How fast a planet would have to move to complete its orbit every couple hours? How it's possible that no one didn't notice it? Or maybe they did? Maybe they know the truth already but don't want us to learn it? Next example of time dilation comes from National Geographic. It seems that scientists confirm the fact that smaller animals perceive the time in slow motion. Of course, they can't tell us that Einstein was a fraud, so they explain this process with quantities of visual information. But now you know the truth. Last example comes from the Hollywood and proves that the truth is already known between the elites. But don't expect them to share this knowledge with the rest of humanity. This is how we would see the subatomic reality according to the movie Ant-Man.
Daddy, where are you?
You can go subatomic. Go subatomic. Oh no. You would enter a reality where all concepts of time and space, become irrelevant. Become irrelevant. Time and space become irrelevant. As you shrink, as you shrink, as you shrink, for all eternity. Everything that you know and love